History is often written in ink, but the truest stories are written in secrets. In 1884, a scandal rocked the British aristocracy that was whispered about in drawing rooms, but never printed in the papers until now. It wasn't just a marriage of convenience. It was a deception that could have toppled a dukedom. A desperate father, a runaway bride, and the sister left to pay the price. Goldie Laurent thought she was marching to her doom when she put on her sister's veil. She didn't know she was walking into the arms of the most dangerous man in England, or that the scars he hid weren't the only things he was concealing. This is the story of the Duchess who never existed. Rain lashed against the leaded windows of Laurent Manor, sounding less like weather and more like a warning. Inside the master study, the air was thick with the scent of stale tobacco and rising panic. Baron Charles Laurent paced the length of the Persian rug, his face utterly drained of colour. "She's gone, Charles. Truly gone." The Baroness, weeping into a lace handkerchief, pointed a trembling finger at the letter resting on the mahogany desk. It was a brief, cruel note, penned in hurried script. Rosalind, the eldest daughter. The beauty of the season, the family's golden ticket out of financial ruin, had fled. She had run off with a penniless poetry tutor hours before the carriages were set to depart for the north. Goldie Laurent stood in the corner of the room, her hands folded tightly to stop them from shaking. She was the shadow of the Laurent household, the sensible one, the quiet one, the one who managed the ledgers while Rosalind managed the suitors. "The contract is signed," Charles hissed, slamming his hand onto the desk. "Lord Vane expects a bride. If we do not deliver one, he calls in the debts. We lose the manor. We lose everything. We will be in the poorhouse by Tuesday." Goldie stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "We must tell him the truth, Father. Surely Lord Vane will understand that—" "Understand?" Charles spun on her, his eyes wild. "Henry Vane is a recluse, a war-hardened brute known as the Butcher of Bengal, before he returned to England. He doesn't want romance. He wants a transaction. He bought a Laurent bride to give his remote estate an heir, and he paid £50,000 for the privilege." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Charles looked at his wife, then slowly his gaze drifted to Goldie. Goldie felt the blood freeze in her veins. "No," she whispered. "Father, no. Rosalind is the beauty. I am just Goldie." "You are a Laurent," Charles said, his voice dropping to a desperate growl. "You have the same dark hair, the same eyes, in a veil, in the dim light of a chapel. He will not know." "He will know eventually," Goldie cried, stepping back. "And by then the vows will be said," her mother interjected, wiping her eyes. Her sorrow suddenly replaced by a terrifying practicality. Once the marriage is consummated, he cannot annul it without a scandal that would ruin him as much as us. He prefers his privacy, does he not? He won't admit he was duped. It was madness. It was a scheme born of utter desperation. But as Goldie looked at her parents, at the fear etched into their aging faces, she realized the trap had already snapped shut. She wasn't being asked. She was being sold. 2 hours later, Goldie was shoved into the family carriage. She wore Rosalind's silk wedding dress, hastily pinned at the waist, because Goldie was thinner than her sister. The corset was too tight, digging into her ribs like a cage. As the carriage lurched forward into the storm, leaving the only home she had ever known, Goldie touched the cold glass of the window. She was no longer Goldie Laurent. To the world and to the terrifying stranger waiting in the wilds of Yorkshire, she was Rosalind, She was traveling to marry a man, rumor said, had a face so scarred he refused to show it in daylight. A man who had bought a wife because no one would love him for free. The journey to Yorkshire took 3 grueling days. By the time the carriage rolled through the iron gates of Blackwood Hall, the landscape had shifted from the lush greens of the south to the harsh, wind-swept moors of the north. Blackwood Hall was a fortress of grey stone, imposing and grim, perched on a cliff edge overlooking a churning sea. It looked less like a home and more like a prison. The carriage door opened. A severe-looking housekeeper in stiff black bombazine awaited her. "Lady Rosalind," the woman said, though she didn't curtsy. "I am Mrs. Higgins. The master is waiting in the chapel. He wishes to get the ceremony over with immediately." "Immediately?" Goldie asked, her voice trembling. "I haven't even washed the dust from the road." "The master does not care for delay." Goldie was marched through the draughty corridors. The house was strangely silent. There were no flowers, no guests, no music. It was cold, so cold that she could see her breath in the air. They reached the private chapel. It was lit only by a few flickering candles near the altar. Standing there with his back to her was a man. He was tall, imposingly so. His shoulders were broad, straining against the fabric of a black frock coat that looked military in its cut. He didn't turn as she approached. The priest, a nervous little man, who looked as if he wanted to be anywhere else, cleared his throat. "We are gathered. Skip the preamble," the man said. His voice was a deep baritone, rough like gravel grinding under a boot. He finally turned. Goldie gasped, though she tried to swallow it. Henry Vane wore a mask. It was a simple black porcelain piece covering the left side of his face from forehead to jaw. The visible side of his face was striking a sharp jawline, a mouth set in a grim line, and an eye of piercing icy blue. But the mask, it spoke of violence and secrets. He looked at her. His gaze wasn't filled with lust or admiration. It was calculating. He scanned her from head to toe, his blue eye narrowing slightly. "You are smaller than I recall from your portrait," he said. Goldie's heart hammered against her ribs. He knows. He knows already. "The journey. It was tiring, my lord," she managed to say, pitching her voice a little higher, trying to mimic Rosalind's breathless affectation. Henry grunted. He stepped forward and took her hand. His grip was firm, his skin rough with calluses. He did not at all wear gloves. The ceremony was a blur of Latin and fear. When the time came, he shoved a heavy gold ring onto her finger. It was loose. "I pronounce you man and wife," the priest squeaked. Henry dropped her hand immediately. He turned to Mrs. Higgins, who was standing in the shadows. "Take her to the East Wing. She is not to disturb me in the West Wing under any circumstances. Dinner is at 8. I expect silence." Without another word to his new bride, without a kiss, a smile, or even a welcome, Henry Vane strode out of the chapel, his heavy boots echoing on the stone floor. Goldie was left standing at the altar, shivering in her sister's dress. She had survived the wedding, but as the heavy oak doors slammed shut, she realized the real danger was just beginning. She was taken to a room that was luxurious, but dusty as if it hadn't been used in decades. She spent the afternoon pacing her mind, racing. Why did he wear a mask? Why did he isolate himself? And why did a man with a reputation for brutality have a library of books on political theory and philosophy scattered on the hall table she had passed? Dinner was a torture. They sat at opposite ends of a table long enough to seat 20. Henry ate mechanically, ignoring her. My lord, Goldie started deciding that silence would drive her mad. The house, it is very distinct. Henry stopped eating. He looked up, his masked face tilting. Distinct. That is a polite way of saying ruinous, Lady Rosalind. I was told you were a creature of balls and gossip. Do not pretend to have an interest in architecture. I have an interest in where I live, she countered, forgetting to play the part of the vapid sister. Her natural sharpness slipped through. And I prefer ruinous to suffocating, which is what London is. Henry paused. For a second, a flicker of surprise crossed his unmasked eye. He put down his fork. You are not what the reports described. Goldie froze. People change, my lord? Rarely, he murmured. He stood up abruptly. I have work. Do not wander the house at night. The corridors are unsafe. He left her alone again. That night Goldie could not sleep. The wind howled against the stone walls. Around midnight she heard a sound, not the wind, but a rhythmic clicking like a telegraph machine. It was coming from the floor below her. Driven by a curiosity that outweighed her fear, she slipped out of her room. She held a candle shielding the flame with her hand. She crept down the hallway, following the sound. It led her not to the servants' quarters, but toward the forbidden west wing. She reached a heavy oak door that was slightly ajar. Inside the room was dark, save for a single lamp on a desk. Henry was there. He had removed his coat and was in his shirt sleeves. But what shocked Goldie wasn't his attire. He wasn't wearing the mask. Goldie leaned forward, peering through the crack. She expected to see a monster. She expected a face mangled by war, a visage of horror. Instead, she saw nothing. There was a scar, yes, a thin white line running from his temple to his cheekbone. It was noticeable, but hardly disfiguring. It certainly didn't warrant a mask or a life of hiding. He was, in fact, devastatingly handsome, with a rugged, intense weariness that made him look like a fallen angel. He was sitting at a complex desk covered in maps and decrypting ciphers. He was speaking to a man standing in the shadows, a man dressed in the uniform of the Royal Guard. The Prime Minister is traveling to Leeds on Thursday. Henry said, his voice completely different, crisp, authoritative, commanding. The assassination attempt will happen at the train station. We have to intercept the courier before he reaches the Radical's cell. Your Grace, the guard replied with a bow. If you intervene personally, you risk exposure. If the Crown finds out the Duke of Rothmore is alive. The Duke of Rothmore is dead, Henry snapped. He died in the fires of the embassy 3 years ago. I am just Captain Vane, a scarred hermit, and I intend to keep it that way until I find the traitor who sold us out. Goldie clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp, but in her shock her elbow bumped the door. It creaked. Henry's head snapped up. In a fluid motion, he drew a revolver from the desk and aimed it directly at the door. Come out, he commanded, his voice ice-cold. Now! Goldie stepped into the light, her heart pounding oh hard, she thought it would burst. Henry lowered the gun slightly, his eyes widening in genuine shock. Rosalind, no, she whispered, realizing there was no point in lying to a man who was living the biggest lie of all. She stood tall, meeting his gaze. My name is Goldie. The silence in the study was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the ragged breathing of the two people standing on opposite sides of the threshold. Henry Vane stood frozen, the revolver lowered but still heavy in his hand. The man who had been standing in the shadows, a Sergeant Thomas, had melted back against the bookshelves. his hand hovering over his own weapon, waiting for a command. "Goldie." Henry repeated the name, tasting the deception on his tongue. He stepped closer, the lamplight catching the sharp, undamaged angle of his jaw. The mask lay discarded on the desk, a hollow piece of porcelain that had been his shield against the world. "So the Lawrence are not just bankrupt, they are swindlers. They promised me the diamond of the season, Rosalind. Instead, they sent me the spare—" Goldie finished for him, her chin lifted high despite the terror clawing at her throat. "They sent the one who reads the books Rosalind would use to steady a table. They sent the one who knows how to keep a ledger, how to stretch a pound, and how to keep a secret." Henry laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "A secret you think you can keep this secret." He gestured to his unscarred face, then to the maps of the royal train routes scattered on his desk. "Do you have any idea what you have walked into, Goldie? I am not just a recluse playing with toy soldiers. If the wrong people learn that the Duke of Rothmore did not die in that embassy fire 3 years ago, they won't just sue you for breach of contract. They will burn this house down with us inside it." Goldie looked at the maps. She saw the circles drawn in red ink around the lead station. She saw the ciphers. Her mind, trained on the complex economics of a failing estate, recognized the patterns of logistics. "You are hunting the cabal," she said softly. "The group that orchestrated the anarchist bombings in London last spring." Henry's eyes narrowed, dangerous and sharp. "How do you know that name?" "I read the papers, my lord. I don't just look at the fashion plates. I read the reports from the Home Office. The pattern of the attacks. They target supply lines and communication hubs." She took a step into the room, ignoring the sergeant's tense shift. "You are protecting the Prime Minister." Henry studied her for a long moment. The anger in his eyes slowly cooled, replaced by a calculating assessment. He holstered the revolver. "Leave us, Thomas," he commanded, without looking away from her. The sergeant hesitated. "Sir, she knows—" "I said leave us." When the door clicked shut, Henry walked to the small sideboard and poured 2 glasses of brandy. He handed one to her. His hand was steady. "Drink," he ordered. "You look like you're about to faint, and I have no smelling salts." Goldie took the glass and downed it in one burning gulp. She coughed, but she didn't waver. "Here is the situation, Goldie Laurent," Henry said, leaning against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. "I am legally dead. The title of Rothmore is in abeyance. I operate as Henry Vane, a scarred, embittered nobody, so that I can move in the shadows and hunt the men who killed my family and tried to kill me. I needed a wife to cement my cover. A recluse is suspicious. A recluse with a vapid high-maintenance wife is a man who has simply given up on life. It is the perfect camouflage." And Rosalind was supposed to be that camouflage, Goldie realized. "You wanted a woman who would complain about the weather and order new curtains, keeping everyone convinced you were just a domestic curiosity." "Precisely. Instead, I have you." He stepped closer, towering over her. The proximity was overwhelming. Without the mask, his intensity was raw, magnetic. "You are intelligent, you are observant, and you are a liar. These are dangerous traits in a wife, but useful traits in a spy." "I am not a spy," she whispered. "You are now," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "We are at an impasse. You cannot leave because you know my secret. I cannot send you back because your father has already spent my money. So we make a bargain." Goldie gripped the empty glass. "What kind of bargain?" You will play the part of Rosalind Vane. You will be the haughty, spoiled mistress of this hall. You will host dinners if I ask. You will be seen in the garden. You will write letters home complaining of my temper. You will convince the world that I am a scarred monster, and you are a miserable bride. And in return, Goldie asked, her gaze steadying. In return? Henry said, his eyes locking onto hers. I will save your family. I will pay off not just the immediate debts, but the mortgage on your father's estate. I will ensure your sister, the real Rosalind, is not pursued for her breach of contract. And when my work is done, when the cabal is destroyed, I will grant you an annulment and a settlement that will make you independent for the rest of your life. It was a deal with the devil. She knew it. But looking at him, seeing the weary determination in the lines of his face, the burden of a dead name he carried, she felt a strange pull. It wasn't just fear. It was recognition. He was hiding just as she had hidden in her sister's shadow for all her life. I have one condition, Goldie said. Henry raised an eyebrow. You are in no position to negotiate. I am the only one who knows your face, she countered. My condition is this: I will not just be a prop. If I am to live in this fortress, terrified of every shadow, I want to know why. I want to help. I will not sit in the drawing room doing needlepoint while you risk your life downstairs. Henry stared at her. For a second she thought he might throw her out. Then the corner of his mouth twitched a ghost of a smile. Very well, Goldie, he said. Welcome to the war. 3 weeks later, the transformation of Raven's Cliff, the estate, formerly known as the Vane Stronghold, was complete. To the outside world, it was a gloomy place inhabited by an unmatched couple. But inside it had become a hive of activity. Goldie, still answering to Rosaline in front of the servants, sat on the floor of the library, surrounded by decoding ciphers. She had a natural talent for patterns. Where Henry saw military strategy, she saw the flow of numbers and logistics. You missed a variable in the lead's correspondence, she said, without looking up, dipping her pen in ink. Henry, who was sharpening a dagger by the fireplace, paused. Impossible. I used the Caesar shift. It's not a Caesar shift. It's a Visionaire cipher, keyed to the date of the next full moon. She handed him the paper. They aren't meeting at the train station. That's the distraction. They're meeting at the opera house. Henry took the paper, his blue eyes scanning her work. He looked at her, and for the first time the look wasn't one of calculation, but of genuine respect. You are wasted on embroidery, Goldie, he murmured. I always told my father that, she replied dryly. But he preferred I focus on my piano. Speaking of which, Henry said, his tone shifting instantly to business. We have a guest arriving in an hour. You will need to play. Goldie froze. A guest? You said we were to be isolated. I said I was a recluse. But to maintain the illusion of a legitimate marriage, we must occasionally endure the curiosity of the neighbors, and this neighbor is particularly dangerous. Henry stood and tossed the dagger onto the table. Lord Harrington. He is a minor peer, a gossip, and I suspect a financier for the cabal. He is coming to welcome the new bride, but he is coming to sniff around. He wants to see if the butcher of Bengal is truly a crippled hermit. What do I do? Goldie asked, standing up and brushing the dust from her skirts. Henry walked over to her. He reached out, and with a touch that sent a jolt of electricity through her, tucked a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. You be Rosalind, he said softly. You be vain. You be bored. You be charmingly dim-witted. And above all, you treat me with disdain. If you show me affection, he will be suspicious. No one loves a beast, Goldie. Remember that. The bitterness in his voice stung her. Some might, she said quietly. Henry pulled his hand back as if burned. He turned away to retrieve his mask. Get changed. Put on the jewels. All of them. An hour later, the drawing room was tense. Lord Harrington was a rotund man, with oily manners and eyes that darted around the room like trapped flies. He sat on the velvet sofa sipping tea while Goldie played a simple, stumbling melody on the grand piano. Henry sat in the corner, the mask securely in place, his bad leg propped up on a stool, a feigned injury to add to the ruse. Charming, Harrington drawled, watching Goldie's back. Simply charming. We were all so shocked to hear of the marriage, Lord Vane. We thought you were committed to your solitude. A man needs an heir. Henry grunted, his voice rough. And the Baron needed money. A fair exchange. Goldie hit a discordant note on purpose. She spun around on the bench, flashing a bright, brittle smile. Oh, hush, Henry. You make it sound so romantic. She looked at Harrington. He is utterly dreadful, Lord Harrington. He forbids me from going to London. He says the air is bad for his condition. I am perishing of boredom. Harrington chuckled, but his eyes remained cold. A tragedy, Lady Rosalind. But surely you find ways to entertain yourself. This house, it has such a history. I recall the Duke of Rothmore used to visit here years ago, before his untimely death. The room went still. Goldie saw Henry's hand tighten on the armrest of his chair until his knuckles turned white. I wouldn't know, Henry growled. I purchased the deed after the fire. Of course, Harrington said, leaning forward. But it is strange. There are rumors, foolish rumors naturally, that the Duke had a safe hidden in this very house. A safe containing lists of names, royal names. He was fishing. He was looking for a reaction. Goldie laughed, a high, tinkling sound that shattered the tension. A safe? Oh, I wish if there were a safe, I would have cracked it by now to see if there was any jewelry inside. Henry gives me nothing but gloom and old books. She stood up and walked over to Harrington, pouring more tea. Do you know, Lord Harrington, I actually found a secret panel in the library yesterday. Henry's head snapped up. This wasn't in the script. Harrington's eyes lit up. Did you now? Yes, I was so excited. Goldie leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. And do you know what was inside? What? Harrington asked, breathless. Mouldy account ledgers from 1750. She sighed dramatically. I was devastated. I thought it might be a love letter, or at least a gold coin. Harrington deflated. He laughed, but it was a disappointed sound. Ah, the mundane reality of history. Quite, Goldie said. Now tell me about London. Is it true that bustles are going out of fashion? Henry wouldn't know a bustle if it hit him in the face. She successfully steered the conversation into 20 minutes of frivolous fashion gossip, boring Harrington into submission. When the carriage finally took the lord away, Goldie collapsed onto the sofa, exhaling a breath she felt she'd been holding for an hour. Henry stood up, kicking the footstool away. He ripped the mask off his face and tossed it onto the chair. You took a risk, he said, but there was no anger in his voice. The library panel. How did you know? I didn't, she said, looking up at him. I lied. But I saw his eyes. He wasn't looking for a safe, Henry. He was looking at your hands. My hands. When you mentioned the deed, Goldie explained, your hand clenched. You have a signet ring tan line on your pinky finger. The Duke of Rothmore wore the Rothmore signet. Captain Vane does not. Henry looked at his hand. The faint pale band of skin was barely visible, but it was there. He looked back at Goldie, his expression unreadable. The air between them shifted, charged with a sudden intense awareness. "You saved me," he said quietly. "I told you." Goldie replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I am not Rosalind. I pay attention." Henry crossed the room in 2 long strides. He stopped right in front of her. The heat radiating from him was palpable. For a moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. The danger, the deception, the adrenaline, it had forged a bond between them that was stronger than any vow. "You are dangerous, Goldie," he whispered, his blue eyes searching hers. "If I'm not careful, you will be the death of me." Or, she dared to say, reaching out to lightly touch the scar on his temple, "I will be the one thing that keeps you alive." He caught her hand. His grip was warm, strong. He lowered his head, his forehead resting against hers for the briefest of seconds. It was an intimacy more shocking than a kiss. "The opera house," he said, pulling away abruptly, the soldier returning to the surface. "You were right about the cipher. The attack is tonight, and I cannot go alone." "Then don't," Goldie said, standing up. "Take me. It's too dangerous." "It's a masquerade gala," she said, remembering the newspaper on his desk. "Captain Vane cannot be seen there, but a wealthy bored socialite and her mysterious masked husband. We would be invisible." Henry looked at her, really looked at her, and a slow, fierce grin spread across his face. It transformed him, making him look years younger, reckless and alive. "Go put on the blue dress," he commanded, "and bring your pistol. I hope you shoot better than you play the piano." "I don't miss." Goldie smiled. They were walking into the fire together. And for the first time in her life, Goldie Laurent wasn't afraid. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The Royal Opera House in Leeds was a cavern of gold leaf and red velvet, humming with the murmur of the elite. Tonight, the air smelled of expensive perfume floor wax and the metallic tang of impending violence. Goldie stepped out of the carriage, her hand resting on Henry's arm. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk, the bodice stiff with jet beads that glittered like armor. On her face was a domino mask of black lace. Beside her, Henry was a towering figure in formal evening wear, his own mask, a severe strip of black velvet that concealed the scar he had painted onto his skin earlier that evening, a double deception. "Stay close," Henry murmured, his voice barely audible over the clatter of hooves on cobblestones. "Harrington is here. I saw his carriage. If the cabal strikes, it will be during the crescendo of the second act. The noise will mask the gunshot." "I have the pistol in my reticule," Goldie whispered back, clutching the small beaded bag. "Though I pray I do not have to use it. If you have to use it, aim for the center of mass. Don't hesitate." Henry's grip on her arm tightened as they ascended the grand staircase. "And Goldie, try to look like you adore me. We are the scandalous newlyweds, remember?" Goldie looked up at him. Beneath the brim of his hat, his blue eyes were scanning the crowd with predatory focus. Yet when they landed on her, they softened. "That part," she said, her voice catching, "will be the easiest lie I tell all night." Henry faltered in his step just for a fraction of a second. He looked at her, startled, but the crowd swept them forward before he could reply. Inside the ballroom was a swirling sea of color. They moved through the crush, a striking pair that drew whispers, the Beast of Blackwood and his purchased bride. Goldie played her role perfectly, laughing too loudly at Henry's ear, fanning herself with theatrical boredom, while her eyes darted from the balcony to the exits. "Target sighted," Henry breathed. Goldie followed his gaze. In the royal box, the Prime Minister sat unaware that he was the centerpiece of a deadly game. But it wasn't the Prime Minister Henry was looking at. It was a waiter moving with a grace that was too efficient, too sharp for a servant. He was inching toward the box, a champagne bottle in hand. "That's not a waiter," Henry said. "That is Alexei Volkov, a Russian anarchist, a bomb maker." "He's not carrying a bomb," Goldie hissed. "He's carrying a bottle." "Nitroglycerin can be stabilized in liquid," Henry noted grimly. "If he drops that bottle in the box..." "We can't shoot him," Goldie realized. "If we miss and hit the bottle, we kill everyone." "I have to get close," Henry said. "I need a distraction, a big one." The orchestra began to swell, the opening notes of a Strauss waltz filling the hall. The crowd parted to form a dance floor. "Dance with me?" Goldie said suddenly. "What now?" "It gets us to the center of the floor, closer to the box." She didn't wait for his answer. She grabbed his hand and pulled him into the swirl of dancers. Henry was stiff at first, his body coiled for combat, not choreography. But as Goldie stepped into his frame, he adjusted. He moved with a surprising, powerful grace. For a moment, the mission faded. There was only the heat of his hand on her waist, the brush of her silk skirts against his legs, and the intense electric connection between them. They spun closer to the royal box. "Spin me out," Goldie ordered. "When the music peaks, drop me." "Goldie, do it!" As the cymbals crashed, Henry spun her. Goldie feigned a faint letting out a cry as she collapsed onto the floor in a heap of blue silk. "Help!" she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. "My husband! He's trying to kill me!" The music screeched to a halt. The entire opera house froze. Every eye, including the waiters in the royal box, snapped to the woman on the floor, accusing the terrifying, scarred Duke. In that split second of confusion, Henry moved. He didn't run. He vaulted. He leaped from the edge of the dance floor, scrambling up the decorative trellis, leading to the royal box with the agility of a jungle cat. Volkov turned, raising the bottle. Henry didn't use a weapon. He tackled the man, his shoulder driving into the anarchist's gut. The bottle flew from Volkov's hand. Time seemed to slow. Goldie watched the bottle arc through the air. If it hit the floor, the box would be incinerated. Henry, ignoring the man he had just tackled, lunged forward. He caught the bottle inches from the ground, his body skidding across the carpeted floor of the box. Silence stretched for a heartbeat. Then Henry stood up the bottle safely in his hand. He looked at the stunned Prime Minister. "Your vintage, sir," Henry said, his voice rough and breathless, "is corked." Pandemonium erupted. Security guards swarmed the box. Volkov scrambled to escape, but Henry delivered a swift, brutal kick to the man's temple, knocking him unconscious. Down on the dance floor, Goldie scrambled to her feet. She saw Lord Harrington in the shadows of the mezzanine, his face twisted in fury. He locked eyes with her. He saw the pistol she had half drawn from her bag. He knew. "Henry!" she screamed, pointing up. "Harrington!" A shot rang out. Not from Henry, but from the shadows. Harrington fired at the box. Henry threw himself in front of the Prime Minister. The bullet struck Henry's shoulder, spinning him around. The crowd screamed and stampeded for the exits. "Henry!" Goldie tore through the panic, hitching up her skirts and running up the stairs. She found him leaning against the velvet railing, clutching his shoulder. Blood was seeping through his white shirt, stark and terrifying. "I'm fine." He gritted out, his face pale beneath the mask. "Flesh wound. We have to go. Now. before the police start asking why a recluse moves like a commando. Goldie grabbed his good arm, hauling him up. The service exit. I scouted it. They fled into the cool night air, leaving the chaos behind them. They tumbled into their carriage, Henry groaning as he sank into the seat. "Drive!" Goldie yelled to the coachman. As the carriage lurched forward, Henry ripped off his mask, tossing it to the floor. He looked at her, sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes burning with adrenaline and pain. "You," he wheezed, a smile tugging at his lips, "are a terrible actress. He's trying to kill me." Goldie tore a strip from her petticoat, pressing it against his bleeding shoulder. Her hands were shaking, tears stinging her eyes. "It worked, didn't it? You saved them. You saved everyone." Henry reached up with his bloody hand, cupping her cheek. "I don't care about everyone," he whispered, his voice raw. "I only looked back to see if you were safe." Goldie leaned into his touch, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. In the darkness of the carriage, speeding away from death, the line between the lie and the truth finally vanished. The return to Ravenscliff was a blur of rain and urgency. Sergeant Thomas met them at the door, his face grim as he helped Goldie support Henry's weight up the stairs. They bypassed the master bedroom, heading straight for the secure study. It was the only room Henry felt safe in. "Get the brandy and the surgical kit." Goldie ordered, her voice brooking no argument. She had shed the persona of the vapid debutante completely. She was the mistress of a war zone now. While Thomas gathered supplies, Goldie helped Henry out of his ruined coat and shirt. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder, painful, bloody, but as he had said, not fatal. She washed the wound with warm water, her hands steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Henry sat on the edge of the leather sofa watching her. He didn't flinch as she cleaned the raw flesh. "You have done this before," he observed quietly. "My father's hunting dogs," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. "And once a stable boy who got kicked by a horse. One learns practicality when one cannot afford a doctor." "Goldie." She looked up. He was bare-chested, the firelight casting long shadows across the scars that littered his torso, real scars from real wars. But his eyes were gentle. "You should leave," he said. "Harrington knows. He saw us. He knows I am not a cripple, and he knows you are not a fool. The game is up. I can have Thomas take you to a safe house in Scotland tonight. And leave you." Goldie poured brandy over the wound, ignoring his sharp intake of breath. "To do what? Fight the cabal alone. You'll be dead in a week." "I am already dead, remember." "Stop it," she snapped, beginning to bandage the shoulder tightly. "You are Henry. You are the man who saved the Prime Minister. And you are my husband." "By law," he said, "based on a lie." "The lie doesn't matter anymore." She tied the knot and stepped back, wiping her hands on a towel. "I'm not going anywhere, Henry. We started this together. We finish it together." Henry stood up, ignoring the pain. He stepped close to her, his uninjured arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The smell of copper gunpowder and rain clung to him. "You are nothing like your sister," he murmured, his nose brushing against her hair. "Thank God." He kissed her. It wasn't the tentative accidental intimacy of before. It was a claiming. It was hungry and desperate, born of near death and high stakes. Goldie melted into him, her hands clutching his bare back, anchoring him. For a moment, the storm outside ceased to exist. A sharp knock on the door shattered the moment. Henry pulled away instantly, though his hand lingered on her waist. "Enter!" he barked, his voice rough. Sergeant Thomas entered, looking pale. He held a silver tray. On it sat a single cream-colored envelope, sealed with red wax. "A courier just arrived, sir. He said it was urgent. For Lady Vane." Goldie frowned. "For me?" She took the letter. Her name was written in an elegant, familiar script. Too familiar. She broke the seal and unfolded the paper. As she read, the blood drained from her face faster than it had from Henry's wound. "Goldie," Henry asked, stepping closer. "What is it?" She couldn't speak. She simply handed him the letter. Henry read it aloud, his voice turning to ice. "My dearest Goldie, it seems your performance has been inspiring, but every play must have a cast. We found a lovely bird wandering in the Lake District, singing poetry to a pauper. She looks remarkably like you. In fact, she insists she is the real Lady Vane. We have Rosalind. She is unharmed for now. We are willing to make a trade. The cipher key you stole from the opera house and the Duke's journals in exchange for your sister's life. Come alone to the ruins of Whitby Abbey at midnight tomorrow. If we see the Duke, the bird loses her head. H." Henry crumpled the letter in his fist. "Harrington." "They have her," Goldie whispered, sinking onto the sofa. "They have Rosalind. She ran away to be safe and because of me, because I took her place. They found her. They found her because she is leverage," Henry said, his mind shifting instantly back to strategy. "They want the journals. They want the names of the Cabal members I've identified." "We have to give them what they want," Goldie cried. "If we give them the journals, the Cabal survives to kill thousands," Henry said grimly. "And once they have the journals, they will kill Rosalind and you anyway. They leave no loose ends. So what do we do?" "Let her die." Goldie stood up, her eyes blazing. "I won't do that, Henry. She is vain and she is selfish, but she is my sister." "We are not going to let her die," Henry said. He walked to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out 2 heavy Webley revolvers. He checked the chambers with a mechanical click, click, click. "They said come alone," Goldie said. "They said you come alone," Henry corrected. He turned to her, his face hard, the mask of the soldier back in place. "So you will. You will walk into that abbey with the journals in your hand. You will walk right up to Harrington. And you, Henry said, a dark, terrifying glint in his eyes, "will be the shadow in the dark. I will be the ghost they fear. We are going to Whitby, Goldie, and we are going to burn the Cabal to the ground." "It's a trap," she said, trembling. "I know," Henry replied, handing her one of the revolvers. "That's why we're going to spring it." He looked at the grandfather clock. "We have 24 hours to plan a siege against an enemy who expects a surrender. Get some sleep, Goldie. Tomorrow we hunt." Goldie looked at the gun in her hand. It was heavy, cold, and deadly. She thought of Rosalind, terrified and alone. She thought of Henry bleeding for a country that thought him dead. "I won't sleep," she said, loading the gun. "Show me the map of Whitby." The ruins of Whitby Abbey stood like the skeletal remains of a giant against the moonlight, jagged stone arches, reaching up into a sky bruised with purple storm clouds. The wind howled through the empty nave, carrying the scent of salt and decay. Goldie walked the long, grass-choked path toward the central altar. Her hands were empty, held out to show she was unarmed, though the weight of the derringer strapped to her thigh burned against her skin. In her left hand, she clutched a leather satchel containing the journals, mostly old account books Henry had doctored to look like the damning evidence Harrington craved. In the center of the ruins, illuminated by the harsh glow of a lantern, stood Lord Harrington. Beside him, bound to a fallen pillar and gagged with a silk scarf, was Rosalind. The real Rosalind looked nothing like the confident beauty of the season. Her hair was matted, her dress torn, and her eyes were wide with terror. When she saw Goldie dressed in severe riding blacks, walking with a soldier's stride, confusion warred with relief in her gaze. "You came," Harrington sneered, stepping out from behind a crumbling arch. He held a revolver, loosely pointing it at Rosalind's head. "And you brought the book." "I brought it," Goldie called out, her voice steady, carried by the wind. "Let her go." "First the book," Harrington gestured with the gun. "Place it on the ground and kick it over, then back away." Goldie did as instructed. She tossed the satchel. It landed with a heavy thud in the wet grass. Harrington's eyes greedily followed the bag. "You are a fool, Harrington," Goldie said, trying to keep his attention fixed on her. "You think that book will save you? The Prime Minister already knows. The Royal Guard is already moving on your safe houses in London." Harrington laughed, a brittle, manic sound. "The Guard is slow. By the time they decipher the Duke's scribblings, I will be in France. And you," he cocked the hammer of his gun, "you and your sister will be tragic casualties of a robbery gone wrong." "Wait," Goldie stepped forward. "You promised a trade." "I lied," Harrington smiled. "Goodbye, Lady Vane." He swung the gun toward Goldie. Crack. The sound wasn't from Harrington's gun. It came from the darkness above the arches. Harrington's hand exploded in a spray of red. He screamed, dropping the revolver, as a bullet from a high-velocity rifle tore through his wrist. "Now!" Henry's voice roared from the shadows. Goldie didn't hesitate. She dove for the ground, rolling toward the pillar where Rosalind was tied. "Kill them!" Harrington shrieked, clutching his mangled hand. From the shadows of the ruins, 4 hired thugs emerged, clubs and knives in hand. They had been hiding, waiting to ambush Goldie, but they hadn't counted on the ghost of Blackwood. Henry dropped from the stone archway like a dark, avenging angel. He landed on the nearest thug, the momentum driving the man into the dirt with a bone-crunching thud. Henry rose, spinning to meet the second attacker. He moved with a brutal, terrifying efficiency, using his rifle as a club, parrying a knife thrust, and delivering a knockout blow to the man's jaw. "Get Rosalind loose!" Henry shouted, ducking under a swinging pipe. Goldie scrambled to her sister. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the knots. "Rosalind, stay still!" Rosalind was sobbing, paralyzed by shock. Goldie pulled a small knife from her boot, another gift from Henry, and sawed through the ropes. The moment Rosalind was free, she collapsed into Goldie's arms. "Goldie, what is happening?" "Who is that?" Rosalind stammered, staring at the scarred, ferocious man dismantling the thugs 10 yards away. "That," Goldie said, feeling a fierce swell of pride, "is my husband." A gunshot rang out. Goldie spun around. Harrington had scrambled to his fallen revolver with his left hand. He was aiming at Henry's back. "Henry!" Goldie screamed. She raised her own derringer. She didn't think. She didn't aim for the center of mass. She simply fired. The bullet struck the dirt inches from Harrington's face, spraying mud into his eyes. It was enough. Harrington flinched, his shot going wild, chipping the stone arch above Henry's head. Henry turned. He saw Harrington blindingly trying to aim again. Henry didn't run. He walked. He walked straight toward the man who had tormented him, who had threatened his wife. Harrington fired again, but his hand was shaking too badly. The bullet whizzed harmlessly by. Henry reached him. He kicked the gun out of Harrington's hand and grabbed the man by the lapels, slamming him against the cold stone of the abbey wall. "You wanted the Duke of Rothmore." Henry growled, his face inches from Harrington's. "You found him." "Vane, please," Harrington whimpered. "The police are waiting at the bottom of the hill," Henry said, his voice cold. "They have your journals, they have your accomplices, and now they have you." Henry struck him once, a precise blow to the temple. Harrington slumped to the ground, unconscious. Silence returned to the Abbey, broken only by the distant sound of approaching police whistles and the soft sobbing of Rosalind. Henry turned. He was breathing hard, his knuckles bruised, his coat torn. He looked at Goldie. She stood amidst the ruins, mud on her dress, a gun in her hand, holding her sister up. She looked magnificent. He walked over to them. Rosalind shrank back, terrified of his scar, of his violence. But Goldie stepped forward. She holstered her weapon and took Henry's face in her hands, running her thumbs over his cheekbones, grounding him. "It's over," she whispered. Henry closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "It's over." 3 months later, the London season opened with a scandal that eclipsed all others. The Duke of Rothmore had returned from the dead. The ballroom was packed to the rafters. Whispers flew like birds as the doors opened. The announcer struck the floor with his staff. "His Grace the Duke of Rothmore, and Her Grace the Duchess of Rothmore." Henry Vane walked into the light. He wore no mask. The scar was there, visible for all to see, a badge of honor, not a mark of shame. He stood tall, proud, and imposing, and on his arm was Goldie. She wore a gown of shimmering silver, her head held high. She was not the quiet sister anymore. She was the woman who had brought down a treasonous cabal. She was the woman who had tamed the beast. In the corner, Rosalind watched them. She stood with her new fiancé, a modest banker she had met in the Lake District. She looked at Goldie, and for the first time in her life there was no jealousy in her eyes, only gratitude. She raised her glass in a silent toast. Henry leaned down to Goldie as they took the floor for the first waltz. "They are all staring," he murmured. "Let them stare." Goldie smiled, looking up at him with eyes full of love. "They are just wondering how a spare became a duchess." Henry tightened his hold on her waist, spinning her into the center of the room. "You were never the spare, Goldie. You were the only one who mattered." As the music swelled, the hidden duke and his fearless bride danced, no longer hiding in the shadows, but shining brighter than any diamond in the room. That is the story of Goldie and Henry, a tale of deception that turned into the truest love of all. From a forced marriage in a stormy chapel to a gunfight in the ruins of an abbey, they proved that sometimes the person you are forced to be with is the only one who can truly see who you are. Goldie wasn't just a replacement. She was the missing piece to a puzzle Henry didn't know he was solving. If you enjoyed this story of secrets, spies, and romance, please hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And here is a question for you. Would you have forgiven your family for forcing you into that carriage? Or would you have walked away? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical saga. Until next time, keep turning the pages of history.